been making our way through a lot of the technical jibbery-jabber stuff, and now we are on our way to focus, which is one of the most critical things, having sharp focus in our pictures. And there's a lot of things that we need to be aware of, and there's a lot of things going on, and a lot of technology involved. So let's just start off with a few of the basics. And the rule of focusing is that you absolutely have to nail it. Misfocused image is completely unacceptable. If you're going to show your portfolio to somebody and you have an image that is a little out of focus, you might as well just throw the whole portfolio away at that point. You should not ever include that in your portfolio because there's just no reason for it. It's just carelessness not getting things right, and so you have to have things sharp. Now, having said that, what about the possibility of sharpening up afterwards? Raw images do need a little bit of sharpness added to them for printing, for screen purposes, and that's kind of part of the standard process. But if you shoot a picture out of focus, can you fix it now? The answer is no. Well, what about in the future? What about with some science fiction software? Will we be able to fix out of focus pictures? And my assumption on that is no, we will not. If you don't have information in that detail, for instance, on this background right here, we got some wood planks. If this goes completely out of focus, you're not going to be able to see the line here, and there is no program in the world that's going to know that there's supposed to be a line right here and a line right here. And so if it's out of focus, no, we won't be able to fix it in the future. I do believe, and there are cameras out right now, that you can shoot that records light in a completely different manner, and it records kind of all levels of focus, and you can decide on how much depth of field and where you want that focus later on. So I think that's a very real capability in future cameras, but I think the ability to save out-of-focus pictures is about zero, and so you really have to do everything to get them right, and there's a lot of things going on in your camera to help you get it right, and you need to know how to make the best use of those tools in your camera. First off, when you are focusing, it's really nice when you have a lens that has an actual focusing scale on it. That's that little indicator up on the top that tells you where you are focused. As you focus the lens, or the lens is autofocusing, when you focus on close-up subjects, the lenses are moving away from the camera body, which is why when we put on that extension tube that we talked about earlier, we're moving the body and the lens further apart so that we could focus closer up. When you focus to infinity, the lenses are typically moving back closer to the film plane in the body. Now, something to realize, if you'll notice on the distance scale that I have illustrated here, there is an infinity mark and a little arrow right beside it, or an angled mark. The angled mark, that 90-degree angle, is where infinity is at. Many lenses, most lenses, can focus a little past infinity. That's right, your lenses focus beyond infinity. And this is to accommodate for heat and cold contraction. If your lens focused just up to infinity and then the parameters slightly changed, you may not be able to focus on infinity. And so what they do is they allow lenses to focus beyond infinity. And this is very important to know if you ever want to do star point photography at night. Because what you cannot do is take your lens and just rack it all the way to the infinity side. Because if you do that, you're actually going probably past infinity. So be aware, if you have a focusing scale like this on your lens, that you have infinity and something beyond infinity. And I guess a further point on that is that the mark that it says for infinity is not always correct. It may depend on the air temperature or pressure or something else being slightly different in your lens. And so if you are wanting to know where infinity is, you need to kind of check it in daytime, focus on something in infinity, and then look at it on your lens. When doing landscape photography, I am going to be working in manual focus quite a bit of the time. I do like autofocus from time to time, and I will be going back and forth, and I'll be talking specifically how I do that. But one of the things that I prize on cameras and lenses is good systems for manual focusing. One of the things that I dislike about those kit lenses is that they have very narrow focusing rings, very narrow plastic focusing rings with no distance information at all. A much better system is a nice, wide, rubberized focusing ring, so you have something nice and easy to grab onto that's got a nice, smooth turning to it. Also having a distance scale is a major benefit. And I love those Leica lenses that have beautiful focusing rings on them, as well as great depth of field scales. I'm going to explain these a little bit more in depth in a section coming up, but these depth of field scales, having those all laid out, can really help you figure out how to set the camera for maximum depth of field. One of the other tools that you should be familiar with for many situations is magnified playback. And this is just simply where you play back an image that you have shot, and you go in and you zoom in. All the cameras have this, and you can check sharpness out in the field. This way you can be really sure that you got your image as sharp as possible. And so you want to zoom in usually to the maximum amount to see if your image is sharp and you don't have movement from the tripod moving or wind blowing it or hand holding, any issues like that. And so make sure that you know how to work those on your camera, because you're going to be using those quite a bit. Let's talk about autofocus. And I'm not going to go through all the basics like I did in my fundamentals class, but you should be aware of the focusing points that you have on your camera. The number one problem that most amateurs have when they are using a digital SLR, who may not be familiar with it, is they point their camera at a subject like this, and they press down on the shutter release, and the camera just doesn't want to focus. And they don't understand that you have to have a subject that has contrast in front of those brackets for focusing. Now, there's a lot of different cameras on the market that will range anywhere from 9 focusing points all the way up to, I think, 99 focusing points on one of the cameras out there. So be aware of how to change these focusing points and when you are going to want to use them for different types of subjects. For most of my landscape work, I'm going to leave it in the single point mode because I want to be very specific about what I'm choosing. If I'm shooting sports photography, I'm usually choosing a group point if my camera has that. I like the 5-point, I like the 9-point options that are available on many cameras. Many cameras don't have it. Many entry levels don't have that, and what I would use in that case is I would use all the points. I typically don't like all the points because it kind of reaches a little bit too wide of area, but that would be more in action photography. The focusing mode is controlling how your camera is focusing. The first option, the basic option, is what's called single autofocus, often known as AFS. And what happens here is the camera will focus on a subject, and as soon as it figures out and says, okay, I got it, it stops focusing. And this is the type of system that I will use for many different types of photography. So in a case like this is at Yellowstone National Park, I want the tree in focus. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the camera over to get that center focusing bracket, which is my active focusing point. I will press halfway down on the shutter release to focus on my subject. But that's not the final composition I want. I leave my finger halfway down on that shutter, and then I recompose the photograph to get the composition that I want, and I press the rest of the way down. This is called focus lock, and it's something that you should have mastered by this time. It's a very basic concept. Works really good when you want to take a picture of 2 people standing side by side. You focus on one, move the focusing point so they're both in the frame, and you have them nice and sharp, and the background is nice and blurry. So that is kind of convenient for handheld photography. But this doesn't work out real well when you're on a tripod because you're having to press halfway down, recompose the camera, lock in the tripod while your finger's halfway down, and that's just too much stuff going on. And it's going to be hard to keep your finger halfway down in that locked position while you're on a tripod. And if you refocus then, once it's locked down on the tripod, it's going to refocus on the lake in this case, and that tree is going to be out of focus. And so it's a system that works fine for handheld photography, but does not work real well for those working off of a tripod. The other type of focusing that we're not going to use much in landscape photography is the continuous focusing system. This is for sports photography. It's for action, wildlife, where subjects are moving around. Known as AI servo or AFC, this is where the camera is constantly adjusting focus forward and backwards as your subject is getting closer to you and moving away from you. And that is, as I say, pretty much exclusively used in action photography. So you have your focusing points, which is where you focus, and the focusing mode, which is how you focus. And for landscape photography, I am virtually always in single point, single autofocus. I want to be very specific about what I'm focusing on. I want it to focus and stop. When I do action photography, I'm usually in group and continuous. And so those are the 2 modes that I kind of bounce between depending on what I'm doing. Now the way this is controlled in the camera through the different focusing buttons, and there's 3 different buttons that you might or might not have on your camera. The first one, I know you have this one, it's your shutter release. It's where the camera also activates the focusing system. And this is kind of the standard way cameras come from the factory. All of them do. And that is when you press halfway down on the shutter release, the camera activates the light meter of the camera and the focusing system, and the focusing starts to try to achieve whatever is sharpest focus. Once it's achieved, you can press all the way down and get your nice sharp picture. So that's the standard system that is out there. Now, one of the options that most all cameras have is a button on the back of the camera called AF lock. It stands for autofocus lock. If you want to lock the focus in, rather than pressing and holding halfway down, what you can do in this case is once the camera is focused, you simply just press down on the AF lock button and it will lock the focus in. Now, just as a note, a lot of cameras call this an AEL button or an AFL or a combination of those two. There's an auto exposure lock and an autofocus lock. And on many cameras, this is a very important note, this is not turned on by default. You have to go into the menu system and say, yes, I want this button to act as an autofocus lock. So if that's something you want to do, you may need to check into your camera's instruction manual in order to do it. So that is one option. So rather than leaving your finger halfway down on the shutter release, you're pressing a button on the back of the camera. But it gets to be a little too much button pressing for a lot of photographers, including myself. And there's another system that has developed that is much more popular that is often referred to as back button focusing. And what this is doing is it is eliminating the focus in the shutter release, and we're activating focus with a button on the back of the camera. And so this needs to be done in the light meter, or excuse me, in the menu system where we turn off the option of focusing with our shutter release. So now, what we're going to do is we're going to start with a button on the back of the camera called AF on. And a number of cameras, but not all, have an AF on button on the back of the camera. There are a number of entry-level cameras. Let's take, for instance, a Canon Rebel camera, for instance. There'll be a button on the back of the camera that says AEL, AFL, but if you go into the custom functions, you can reprogram it to be an AF on button. And so you're going to have to look very carefully because the wording is a little bit tricky in there. So the idea is you press with the back button to focus, and then when you want to take a picture, you can press down for the light meter and press down to take the picture. And the beauty is that once the camera is focused, you don't need to keep refocusing it because once it's focused, it's done and you can continue shooting pictures. And so these AF on buttons usually will say AF on right on them. It's very easy to see what's going on. And so once again, on the back button focusing, it's not something I recommend to everyone. It's not something I recommend to amateur photographers or somebody just getting started because it's complicated the issue. Now that we have 2 buttons, we've got to press one button for focusing and we've got to press a separate button for taking pictures. But once you get used to your camera, this is a really nice system because you don't need to do the focus, lock, and recompose. You can focus, recompose, and shoot as much as you want. But be aware that none of the cameras that I know of has this turned on by default when you buy the camera. You have to go into the menu system and you have to go to the shutter release and say, I don't want it to activate the metering or the focusing system. So I want to turn off the autofocus on that shutter release switch. And this is something that you have to do in your Nikons and Canons as well as many other cameras. And so you really have to be conscious about wanting to put your camera into this back button mode. And so if you study your camera, you'll figure it out. I'm sure you will. And here's the advantage. So let's say I want to take this picture. Well, I can't focus in the middle because there's nothing to focus on. I want to get it off to the side. And using the traditional system, I would have to go to my shutter release, press halfway down, focus on the subject, keep my finger on the shutter release halfway down, recompose the camera, lock in the tripod, and then take the picture. Good luck doing that. A much better system is back button focusing. I'll loosen up the tripod head. I'm going to move the camera over into position, and I'm going to press the back button for focusing. I'll wait till it focuses, and now I am done focusing. I'm going to reposition the tripod head to the composition I like, and then I can commence taking as many pictures as I want. In this case, because the camera is focused, and when I press down on the shutter release, the camera no longer refocuses on that square in the middle, which is nothing in the background. And so it's a very good system if you do want to have a little bit of autofocusing help and you are using a tripod. It does also work quite well for handheld photography as well. A lot of the time, I am using manual focus. I'm just looking through the viewfinder and I'm manually focusing the lens. That's why I appreciate a nice focusing ring. I like those focusing scales on the top. One of the ways that you can do this very, very accurately, even if you don't have very good vision, is with something called live view focusing. This has come about in recent years because now we can look at images on the back of our camera and we can see what our cameras are pointed at. In general, this is a bad viewfinder. It's not as sharp as what you can see in the viewfinder. It may not have the right colors. It's hard to see under bright sunlight, but it can be good in certain situations. Obviously very good for a unique point of view, especially for those cameras that have the flip out screen or have a little tilty screen. You can get the camera above your head or down low very easy. Most of the cameras, but not all of them, there's getting to be more and more that have a decent autofocus system, but most of the cameras on the market today do not focus very quickly when they are in the live view mode. I find this to be a very good benefit when I am on a tripod. Sometimes it's kind of hard to get up into position wherever the tripod is, either because it's so low or it's high or it's in an unusual position. And so I use live view quite a bit when I'm on a tripod. And this is where using manual focus and zooming in to check sharpness works really, really well. So let me show you how this works. On most of your cameras these days, we're going to have a live view switch. So you're going to have to turn on live view, however that works on your camera. And now you're seeing what is coming through the front of your lens of the camera. There's going to be a magnify button somewhere on the back of your camera, and you're going to need to zoom in. At this point, you would manually focus the lens. So you may have to put your lens in manual focus and then just turn the focusing ring until it appears very, very sharp. In this case, on my camera, it's magnifying the image 10 times. The image looks 10 times closer, and when it's that much magnified, I'm really going to be able to get very critically precise, accurate focusing. And so I can nail the focus, zoom back to the full shot, and now I know that I've got perfect focus. So here's a short video of me doing this. First, I'm going to grab the focusing ring and focus to the best of my eye's ability. Then I'm going to go in and I'm going to magnify 5 times, 10 times, and I'm not quite perfect, so I'm going to go back to the focusing ring, adjust focus until it's a little bit sharper, and then I'm going to come back and zoom back to the full image. And so that's how long it takes. It's very, very quick. I can usually do it in 5 seconds out in the field. And I know when I've done that, I have nailed focusing. Absolutely spot on. It's perfect. Now, a number of the newer mirrorless cameras have a number of additional features, and one of them is called a focusing guide. And what this is just a scale to let you know, are you focusing close up or further away? And there's a nice little scale at the bottom that shows you the flower for close up and the mountain for further away, which is kind of nice. Now, I don't have an example of it here, but the Fuji system on their XE1, 2, and the XT1 has a very cool system that not only does it show you where you are focusing near and far, it shows you how much depth of field you are getting as you change from near to far, which is something I've always wanted, and it's one of the best systems I've seen out on the market. But that is something that you're only going to find in a mirrorless camera. Now, the image magnification is basically what we just showed you in live view, but the mirrorless camera's advantage is that you get to see this in the viewfinder. You're not looking on the back of the camera, so if it's bright out, it's something that you can easily see. You can go in, change magnification, manually focus till it's absolutely perfect, and get it right. And having that in camera is one of those digital benefits of the mirrorless cameras. And a lot of those Olympuses and Panasonics, Fujis, and Sonys have this sort of feature built into the viewfinder of it, which I think is a nice big benefit and is one day probably going to make our SLRs obsolete. Now, this last one is called peaking. This is something that people who shoot video have been used to, and this is kind of unusual. What it does is it takes areas that are in focus and it shimmers them, and you can put them in different colors. In this case, I have it colored green, and you can see how I'm focusing on different areas, and it's really showing you very graphically what's in focus. And I'm kind of torn on this one because I really love the visual display, and as you know, I like visual displays. but I've also found it a little irritating because it's kind of messing up my image. And I don't typically leave it turned on, but it's something I like to be able to turn on from time to time. But it's something I don't have on an SLR camera. It's something that you're only going to have on a mirrorless camera, at least in today's market.